Okay friends, one of the first things we have to do to get started on this job is to safely raise and support the rear of the vehicle so the wheel's off the ground, and then we can start removing all of our lug nuts, then the wheel. To remove the caliper, we're going to come right over to our caliper slider bolts. Hold the slider, remove the bolt. We'll leave that in there a couple threads and then fully remove the other one. Let's get this off of here. Now we can remove the caliper from the area. After you remove your caliper, you want to inspect it. If you see any fluid coming around this area right here, it means you have a brake fluid leak and you have to replace the caliper. Assuming this one looks good, let's set it aside. Remove your pads. Might as well get these tins out of the way. With all that out of the way, let's continue on by removing our two caliper bracket mounting bolts. That's nice and loose. Let's leave it in there just a couple threads. Fully remove the second bolt. Remove your bracket, set it aside. Next, we're going to start removing the rotor. You're going to notice that typically you're going to have two mounting bolts on this. If yours are missing, probably somebody's done the brakes and for some reason they didn't put them back in. The best thing you could do now is just go ahead and spray down this area with some penetrant, let it sit, and then we're going to start removing those bolts. The best way to get these mounting screws out of here is, of course, to have one of these drivers right here and a hammer. I'm just going to go ahead and put this right in here with the corresponding bit. As I do this, I'm going to twist it counterclockwise and hopefully it'll start unscrewing it with vibration. And of course, you can use something with light impact, like this air gun right here, and just try to cause some vibration as you try to turn it counterclockwise. Now, if you tried both of those things, the next thing that I would try is this right here. I'm just going to make a nice straight line, and then we'll use a chisel and just try to loosen it up. Get this rotor out of here. With the rotor off there, the next thing we're going to do is clean up the mating surface that's on the bearing. Pretty much any place that's going to touch up against the rotor needs to be clean and free of any debris. Now, once you have it cleaned down as good as you can, the next thing that you want to do is just spray on a little bit of copper never sees. Now let's go ahead and clean up our caliper bracket. Take your sliders, carefully remove the boot from the caliper bracket itself. We'll set that aside. Do the same to the other one. We can set that aside as well. When you remove these, make sure you put them on the corresponding sides. Once you have those out, let's continue on by cleaning up the areas where those bracket tins are going to ride. Now, once you have all four corners cleaned up, we're going to continue on over a nice collection bucket. I want to clean out these caliper slider ports. Use some parts cleaner, carefully spray it in, and then use your bore brush and clean out that hole. Let's give it a rinse. Once the fluid looks nice and clean, let's move along to the next one. Now, once you've cleaned out the slider ports, you want to make sure that you clean this area up along here as well. That's the area where the boots are going to ride for the slider. And of course, if there's debris on there, it might potentially make it so moisture can make its way up inside and cause an issue. Okay, now once you have both of those clean, go ahead and turn that bracket over. Now we're going to pay attention to this area inside here. That's where the rotor's going to be riding. And if you have large flakes of rust inside there, it could potentially get caught up in your brakes. Make sure you clean it out of there. We're all set with this. Let's go ahead and grab onto our sliders. Now for these, we want to go ahead and make sure we take the boots right off of them, and then we need to inspect the boot. You want to make sure that it's not ripped, torn, or damaged in any way. You also want to make sure that it's nice and soft and pliable. If it's stiff or torn, you need to go ahead and replace it. After you decide that it looks good, let's go ahead and clean it out. I'm just going to take this rag, I'll slide it right in through the center, through the other side, and then of course we'll just work it around like this, and the rag will take out any of the debris that's on the inside. Okay, that looks great. The next thing we want to do is make sure we clean up the slider itself. Okay, now this looks fair. The next thing you want to do is clean up inside this area right here. Just like I said on that bracket, this is exactly where that boot's going to ride, and you need to make sure you get all this out of here. Okay, the slider and the boot look great. Let's go ahead and do the same to the other, and then we can start putting this back together. Okay, so we've got everything nice and clean. The next thing we need to do is start lubricating and putting it back together. I'm going to take my slider pin and I'm going to come right across this area here. You might happen to notice that there should be a rubber bushing on this area, but in all honesty, I'm going to be replacing the caliper in my very next video, so I'm not too worried about it. If you don't have yours, it's a good idea to get one. We're going to coat the entire shaft and then make our way all the way up into that area where the boot's going to ride that we cleaned out. Now after that, we can go ahead and take our boot and we're going to slide it right on here. Now at this point, we can go ahead and make sure we have plenty of lubricant on this and we'll slide it into the slider port. As we slide it up, we want to make sure that the caliper slider boot goes right up and over that lip. Before I put it on there though, I'm just going to use a little bit of this caliper grease and I'm going to go right up on there. That's going to help keep the moisture out of there. Once you have the boot on there, go ahead and give it a couple squeezes and just ensure that it's completely on. Give it a nice twist like this and then do the same to the other one. Okay, these look great. Let's go ahead and lubricate all four corners along here. When you do this, you don't need to pile on a whole bunch of grease, just a thin amount like this. This is going to help with vibration dampening and noise reduction. Once you have it lubricated, go ahead and take your tin and we're going to slide it right on there. We'll set it into the grooves, but you can't stop there. Right down along this area right here where the rotor's supposed to ride is where the lock is. You need to make sure you go ahead and press that right in there. The next thing we're going to do is go ahead and make sure we clean up our mounting bolts. We want to make sure that there isn't any grease on there because you definitely don't want grease on these. But of course, if you also had any thread locker on there, make sure you get the old stuff off and put on some brand new thread locker. Before we can put on our rotor, let's make sure we clean down the braking surface. Let's get this on here. We're going to take our two mounting screws. We'll start them in there, snug them up. Carefully put your bracket on here, start in your bolts, snug them up, and then torque them to 52 foot-pounds. So now for this particular caliper, what you're going to have to do is try to spin this piston while you push it down. It's not the typical kind that you can just go ahead and squeeze and it'll force it in. For that, I like to use a tool that looks like this. I'm going to get right in on this piston right here, clip it into all those areas, and then I should be able to press this down and turn it at the same time. After you have that pressed in, let's continue on with some more of that caliper lube. We're going to go right along the piston area that's going to touch up against the pad, and then behind each of these ears. This is going to help with vibration dampening and noise reduction overall. Now it's time to get our pads in there. We're going to carefully slide it in at an angle, pressing down onto these clips, and then we'll gently roll it in. Do the same to the inside pad. Make sure both of your pads can easily move around. If they're stuck in the brackets, you're going to have a braking issue. Let's go ahead and slide the caliper over this with, of course, our caliper slider bolts. Once we get these started, we'll snug them up and then torque them both to 19 foot-pounds. Let's get the wheel back up on here. We'll start all of our lug nuts on, bottom them out, get the wheel on the ground, then torque them to 100 foot-pounds. Torqued. Okay friends, so we got that brake job done. What's left to do now? You're going to do the exact same thing on the other side of the car. After that, just come underneath the hood and double check your brake fluid. Make sure it's topped off. If it isn't, top it off with some .3 brake fluid. After that, take it for a road test.